Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today's episode is called Tribal News. There's a ton of talk on the internet about fake news, and I think that that's the more of a symptom than a cause as to what is wrong with society, what is wrong with our information flows. But what's really interesting is there's this macro ecosystem of behavior that man is engaging in every single day. And I think that up until maybe the last year or so, maybe 5 or so, they hadn't realized it. They hadn't realized that we're all coexisting and that we make decisions based on information. And back in the past, you didn't have global information traveling the world and everybody did just fine. And now all of a sudden we're all foreign policy experts and global economic experts and blah, 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 right? Things that we really don't affect, things that sometimes affect us, sometimes don't. But it is apparent that the major news networks around the world for decades have fake news. They have. And it's because they monetize it. It's because they take whatever information they can slap together in a camera, in an interview, and they will sell advertising around that information. Once you make profit from something, there's an addiction that fires in the dopamine circuits of the board of directors in that company. And I assure you that any connection they had to their soul, to their morals, to their ethics, day after day after day gets eaten away by greed. So on the information side of it, as a business, you have human beings being transformed by the opportunity to make themselves extremely wealthy, to shortcut life, as it were, straight to the summer home, the beach house, the private yacht, whatever. Fortunately, those are a small group of people. But the worst after effect or affect of the situation is that they affect us, and we are the majority. We are the 99%, right? So how does fake news get catalyzed, fortified, authorized, and accepted? How does that happen? It's because there are tribes around portals of news. And actually, I'm going to say that today it's fairly simplified as opposed to where it was 30 years ago when you had a ton of newspapers everywhere. There's something called checks and balances. And the more diversified something is, the more you have some checks and balances, right? You know, the idea was that splitting our country down the middle from the very beginning and creating a left and a right was going to somehow create checks and balances for our government. What it actually ended up being, obviously, was a mechanism for those at the top to control those bickering at the bottom. But in most scenarios, their checks and balances really work out. When it comes to news, one of the checks and balances was that we had multiple news organizations that were not all owned by a single corporation or a few corporations. And so they could operate independently. They could have journalists that were going after major corporations that weren't owned by major corporations, and therefore they were capable of being unbiased, unmanipulated. Aside from taking a private bribe, the story would get written and it would go out. That's how Standard Oil got brought down. But today, 4 or 5 major corporations own every artery of news that at least America ingests on a daily basis. We're talking newspapers, magazines, websites, television shows. I always harp on this show. The Associated Press and Reuters are owned by the Rothschilds. They bought Reuters in the 1850s, and Reuters bought AP in, I believe, 2008. So it's done. And the amount of like Fox and CNN, they were supposed to be diametrically opposed, both supporting Hillary, both against Trump, which wouldn't be the case if they were who they said they were. most of their articles that have to deal with real issues are always linked credit-wise to either Reuters or the Associated Press. But this episode is called Tribal News, so let's really stick on that because I think it's the genesis of the issues that we're dealing with here. Tribes. Well, I have a whole show on tribalism, but that's more about the individual trying to survive in the society of life. But let's pull back for 1 second because, we engage the universe based on the laws of physics around the universe, right? The mathematical laws, the electrical laws, spiritual laws. And the interesting thing is this. We operate based on the fact that there are mechanisms that do the same thing every time we engage the mechanism. We also operate where a mechanism over here that serves one purpose can be carried across a complete paradigm shift to another mechanism, and you can use it in the other mechanism as well. It just works. Why mention this esoteric stuff? Well, let me give you an example of how you can be duped really, really fast. And one of the key characteristics of human behavior that they must have in us in order for this thing to work out. If you worship a logo of any kind, a sports logo is probably one of the easiest ways to brainwash human beings. If you're a big sports fan, then you are utterly and completely primed to be manipulated with their hand up your ass, making you a puppet your whole life. And how is that? How is that true? Now, some of you immediately think, well, I know what he's talking about. He's talking about that distraction of sports. No, but that's a good point. That's always one of the dangers of being addicted to sports is you don't pay attention to the rest of the world. But then maybe those of us who pay attention to the rest of the world, we're full of shit too. But worshiping a logo, however they can get you to do it, Nintendo, a team. Remember, there's all kinds of teams, local, national, international, every single division that the human body has come up with to play a game for baseball, football, basketball, Once you can worship a brand and feel pride around it, which is an arbitrary symbol representing a bunch of arbitrary people who aren't actually from the local region that you worship, right? You might say, LA Raiders. Okay? Where are all the team players from, the teammates from? They're all from different regions of the world. Look at a baseball team. What baseball team doesn't have a guy from Cuba on it, So it's a big faux exercise of elitism. Think about the news. You usually will review the news, and there's one website you always go to view the news. There just is. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be CNN, could be Fox, could be the Drudge Report, could be InfoWars. But you have an allegiance, usually, a warm fuzzy, a familiar feeling. And the interesting thing is that you don't go to the other brand because it gives you the opposite feeling. Betrayal, deceit, lies, the enemy. They just may all be the same thing. Now, I'm old enough to know or to have watched the evolution of how people ingest information. The whole Marshall McLuhan algorithm of the way you ingest your media will change you more than the media coming through itself, meaning the words aren't as important as how the words are spoken to you. I don't know if that's an absolute contradiction or mutually exclusive condition, but he was on to something. He coined the word media. I remember old people reading newspapers. And the only way you could get real information was out of a newspaper. You had to do it. Everything on TV, that was just little sound bites. They knew those were short segments. If you really wanted to hear the whole story, newspapers. Then it sort of advanced up into magazines. Your Rolling Stone magazine, your Playboy magazine, your New Yorker, it's been around forever, your Scientific American. Even more in depth than the newspaper. Obviously, television, 24-hour news came out because you had television news, but it was always at, whatever the times were. But then we came out, Ted Turner came out with a 24-hour news network, CNN. I remember being glued to this as a child. I was starving for information about how the world functioned and who played in these games because I didn't have any Ivy League parents or anything that would know at the dinner table. I mean, they weren't ignorant to it all, but I'm sure they just had the basics. So I ingested it. CNN for me at a point in my 15 through, probably 25. CNN was like my friend at night when I was programming or when I was by myself, pushing through my career at times. It was my tribe. But then this little thing called the internet happened. The internet started really showing its face in my life in 93. I became an engineer in it in 96. But I don't really remember people going to it constantly until the 21st century. It took about 5 to 8 years for that to really start becoming the way we ingest all the information. Of course, as 9/11 occurred, you sort of had us all going to the trough of the internet because they couldn't print a newspaper fast enough. Not all of us could sit around a television constantly. The internet is a way to smuggle that stuff right into work. On your phone, you're sitting on the pod at work, right? But now here's the really interesting thing for even yours truly here. I was well into my 30s before I realized that news was being monetized. Now, obviously, I'm staring right at the advertising. Maybe I should rephrase that and just say before I realized the significance of the fact that news was being monetized. Now, from a business standpoint, one can easily say, well, it's because they have to keep the lights on there, doofus. And there is truth to that. Where else are you going to get money to create a news network unless you sell advertising? But before we go completely down that rabbit hole, let's rewind for 1 second to the formats themselves. I used to watch people buy newspapers like you might think someone would buy a pornographic magazine. It was just, oh my God, I get this information today. The crackle of the paper and the whole process of going down to get the paper, and you meet friends with the guy who's been selling you your paper for 20 years. It was utterly nostalgic. I suppose it still is. But what's interesting is that the information that we're ingesting has to be legit, otherwise it doesn't have any value, right? And what's really, really odd in the 21st century is that we have completely capitulated, or I shouldn't even say that word, we've completely accepted the fact that news organizations are biased. If you're tuning into a channel of news or picking up some rag somewhere, and it's a quote-unquote leftist rag or it's a right-wing rag, it shouldn't be the one you read. Because they are unable to follow the code of journalism, which is to be unbiased. But now how do they get around, in their own mind, being biased? Well, the sneaky way they do it every day is pick your bias, could be left or right, and they curb everything they say to cater to those formulas, right? They always seem to insinuate. They only cover things that really give you a perspective of their perspective, as if you're talking to a university professor who's trying to pump his tribe into the kids' minds, right? One weak-minded, indoctrinated person leading children. Should be a crime around that. But the way you really start to brainwash society through news is through opinion pieces. Someone writes a column in a newspaper. Someone has a column inside of a magazine. Very rare these days, but there are reporters who report things and write those articles on a consistent basis. On the news, you have shows led by individuals who talk for an hour that have their agenda, maybe even half an hour. Again, the entire time pumping advertising at you. Boom, boom, boom. And I think what might be the healthiest thing for us to do is simply say, we the people need to define What would be an ethical form of getting information? What are the standards? Because the battle on the news front today are a bunch of fake news organizations calling other news organizations fake. And the thing is that fake, which we're going to get into that word and what that means, fake is actually a fairly relative designation to begin with. But now let's go back to the corporate symbol that you worship, whatever it is. Some of these brands are brand new. For all intents and purposes, Fox News and CNN are brand new organizations. Even though CNN has at least a decade and a half or so ahead of Fox, to my knowledge. And believe me, I don't find either one of these to be more true than the other. But take old organizations, newspaper organizations that have really never penetrated the web for shit, right? I don't know anybody who goes to LosAngelesTimes.com, NewYorkTimes.com. I don't know anyone who goes to Washington Post, NewYorkPost.com. I don't. I know that there are millions who do, but I have never talked to anyone who says, oh, I was on NewYorkTimes.com this morning. If that's the case, it's a buddy of mine who is releasing a film and they got a little write-up, or there's a play or something local to Los Angeles. That's it. But no one goes to them with a localized name like Los Angeles, New York, Washington. In Washington's probably a little bit closer to having a bit of a insight. Huffington Post, who the hell is that? I mean, we all know who she is, but they look like small players. But for a really long time, these organizations owned people's perceptions. I mentioned a couple times on the show that I have friends of mine and relatives that perceive certain forms of information, meaning the way just like Marshall McLuhan said, they believe that a bound book has, with the stitching, is literally the metaphor of authentication of the information they're about to read. If a publisher decided to bind it and print it in a hardback especially, it's true. In terms of news, well, a newspaper for, 5 decades, if not 10 decades, was considered the only way you get real legitimate information. Magazines are interesting because they are the sort of a cultural phenomenon. In my experience, magazines have always been a way to sort of act posh in a certain category of life. If you had Scientific American, Popular Science, Omni magazine somewhere on your coffee table, people came in and said, oh, you're scientifically intellectual, at least scientific. If someone comes in your house and you've got the Economist, the New Yorker, you were politically aware and maybe intellectually aware of the arts and that sort of thing. And these tribal institutions, these social tribal institutions, are very interesting. There's just a group of folks out there in this world, and I know some of them very, very well, who are terrified of being designated as stupid or ignorant or not knowing something. They have huge problems with it. And they wake up with this as an alarming feeling inside themselves. Just as most of us would be alarmed if we, were drowning in the ocean. That's how they feel. And so as we would clamor in the ocean to find an object to hang on to that's going to float without any effort, that's what they do to try and grab something to give themselves intellectual stability and to be perceived by those they fear so much as being equal. I find that the New Yorker magazine is a great way of finding folks with this issue, because it is sort of a subscription to a higher plane of existence in their mind. I'm bringing smart stuff in my house. Or consequently, the people that buy books that look smart, put them on a shelf and never read them. Now, there might be a great, true methodology of doing this and saying, by me perceiving myself to be smarter, posh, whatever, I will eventually read what I've purchased and I will eventually get there. Maybe there's some truth to that. When you're trying to be an intellectual icon to yourself and to others, when it comes to world politics, world news, the really generic designation is that in the past, 150 years ago, in order to know that much information, you had to do one of two things. Travel the world and see it for yourself, which 150 years ago was utterly brutal. Like, how do you go to Africa and then into deep Europe, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Asia, the Americas? How do you do that within 10 years, traveling by steamboat and what have you, train, if you're lucky? It wasn't easy. So your only other option would be to be in a club where a bunch of people individually did this. One guy goes to China, one guy goes to Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And then you belong to a club where you bring that information together and report back to the rest, and you all have that information to talk about it. And what's really strange is I think that weird designation, that status, that upgrade, that class structure, that class hierarchy is sort of what people still want to this day within themselves. You've all met the person who shows up at a party and here's some sort of conversation going on, and man, they just are trying to push their way in that conversation as soon as possible, right? This last election cycle for the United States of America, it really super duper revealed the problems of America. And I think one of the most hilarious / regrettable characteristics of an American today is that they don't want to research anything, but they want to be experts at everything. And they don't care that they haven't done any research. All they want is the end result, that is their impulse buy to get their impulse securities taken care of, right? If they're greedy, that's all they want is a greed token to be spent, If it's a political belief system, they just want to be told that what they have and what they want and what they desire, not what they need, is being taken care of instantaneously. The people that I see online today, which aren't that many, who are still, really butthurt with the results of the election, they post the most intellectually shallow stuff I've ever seen in my life, the most uninformed political opinions about anything, contradicting reality as efficiently as humanly possible. It's really stunning to see it. But, here's the rub, though. They're good people in a lot of cases. In most of the cases, they're good people, and they really want a good world. They just have no idea how that works. But because they don't do any research on anything, they fear not only their side of their own bias, but they fear the other side 10 times as much, which is why we're getting sort of this end-of-the-world diarrhea manifesto out of most of them, And they pass around little catchphrases about how we're going to be taken back 40, 60 years and black people don't have to sit in the back of the bus again. Unbelievable, right? To give you a perspective, Mark Dice did a great interview with the public, and he asked all these white people about, is it fair that black people are going to have to show their IDs when they vote? And all these white people are like, oh, no, that's not fair at all. And he goes, well, why isn't it fair? And they said, well, black people don't have IDs a lot of the times. And they said, well, why would they have IDs? Well, they don't know where the DMV is, and they don't have access to computers, and they don't know how to use computers. Wow. But if you ask one of those people to define their bias to the world and what they're fighting for, it's equality and a lack of racism. And then Mark Dice, or it wasn't even Mark Dice, it was a different guy. Sorry. Different guy like Mark Dice goes off and interviews a bunch of black folks, and he says, do you have an ID? They go, yeah. Do you know anyone in this neighborhood that doesn't have an ID? No, everyone has an ID. Do you know what the DMV is? Yeah, and they not only knew where it was, but they named the street intersection. I don't even know what the street intersection is to my DMV. And then he said, do you have access to the internet? Oh, yes. Do you know any? Yep. And what do you think about people who say that you are too dumb to know how to run the internet, or you're too poor to have data on your data plans on your phone, and that you don't carry IDs because you're criminals or you don't know where the DMV is? He just literally carried the reflection session from the social justice warrior directly to the body of folks that are supposedly being defended by them. And it was the most efficiently racist thing they'd ever heard. I suppose that digression really calls out the fact that even if we were to fix the legitimacy of news, we have to fix the legitimacy within the minds of the lazy. But let's talk about validating news as true versus false, because this is coming up as a control mechanism to censor the internet. And I don't know if it was planned, and I don't know if it was just organic and they take advantage of it, because, man, there's like a big giant division of the PSYOP, probably Army Corps of PSYOPs, that is dedicated to taking advantage of things. You know, if there's a hurricane, they take advantage of things, right? I'm sure the Bilderbergs have their own copy of that too. So the big dispute that's coming up here is what's true and what's false, aka what is fake and what is real. Well, I guess a further question might be, once we figure that out, the big question is, if you've ever called wolf and if you've ever lied, does your organization get so many passes to have done that? Because if we say, no, that you lied and we have a one lie policy, then a bunch of places are going to go away. Now, you can get some stuff wrong, but people, giving eyewitness accounts of their life and getting it grossly wrong, like Brian Williams, the perpetual fucking liar. It's interesting. But now think about this. Because we're going to try to go in and parse what would be a methodology to say this is real, this is fake, this is true, this is false. That's really what we're talking about, right? Something happens in the world. Something happens in the world and people observe it, witness that something, either remember it, commit it to memory, or have the wherewithal to write it down, or it is videotaped, or it is recorded in audio, and that's pretty much it. Those are the basic mechanisms by which history can be recorded. Now, for those of you who took any psychology in college, even 101, and for those of you who've seen the moonwalking bear video, you will know that we're up against a very interesting interpretation of what happens in society and what happens around the world. In college, when I went for a couple years, they showed a video of some colleges actually act this out, but they bring in a bunch of people into a room and there's a dispute, there's a gun fired, and someone's dead. Then everyone's hauled out of the room who was participating in the reenactment, and the class is then questioned as to what took place. The interesting thing about this exercise was that it wasn't to legitimize news organizations. It was to test racism. The perception is heavily governed by your biases, which is why if you're raised with them, you really shouldn't be in any news organization anywhere on planet Earth. But there was a black male in the group of folks. When asked who killed the person, which I think was a woman, all the white girls said the black guy, on average. The minorities in the room, or other non-white races, I shouldn't even say it anymore, they were like, oh no, it was the white guy. He did it. In the end, it was the white guy that did it. But isn't it interesting that if we form news organizations and tribes around the individuals prior to the event occurring, one of the groups, the white girl group, the white girl news network, would have said the black male killed the woman. And they would be the majority population in the class, while the smaller groups would be saying the actual truth, which the white guy did it. And some people would be confused and didn't see anything at all, right? But the majority of them thought it was the black guy. For those of you who've seen this video on the internet, I think it's just called the moonwalking bear. It's shot underneath an overpass somewhere, and it's a bunch of people passing basketballs back and forth. And they're all in sort of gym clothing, and I can't remember if they're moving around. I think they might be moving a little bit, but they're just getting this little drill, passing basketball around. And you watch the whole thing, and then it's over. And then it says at the end, did you see the moonwalking bear? And almost everyone I've ever talked to, when you watch it all the way through, you don't see a moonwalking bear. And then they slow it down for you in the replay. And sure enough, during this basketball passing exercise, a guy dressed up in a bear costume moonwalked through the entire event. Right in front of your eyes, and you did not see it. It is the mindfuck video of all mindfuck videos when it comes to what you think you saw. So now you want to tell me that human beings can observe reality and get it right? Without a personal bias? Without just the laws of distraction keeping you from seeing something? It's almost as if reality is nothing more than a misdirection magic trick half the time. But now here's the thing. News is not just some non-biased thing that happens. Like we just have random news organizations that randomly report news. That's not the way it works. Maybe if you come from a little tiny hometown like me, sure. You know, the kids down at the elementary school had a play. It's fun for them to see themselves on the cover of the magazine, or cover of the newspaper, cover of the website. Good old-fashioned news. But news, well, we know what it does nowadays. News inspires change. It creates revolution. In some ways, it can create solidification of what's going on, right? So its legitimacy is actually pretty important. There's a symbol out there in the world of a snake eating its tail. And it's sort of a symbol of the perpetual lunacy of how the world works. Right now, what's going to take place, and what is taking place, is that the bigger fake news organizations are trying to tell the public that the smaller fake news organizations aren't legit. The pot calling the kettle black. And because we don't want to be lied to, and because we really don't like having been lied to for a really long time, we're picking sides really fast. Nope, this alternate media group is more true than false. The one I've been following, that's definitely a truthful organization. Some of you might know enough history to know what yellow journalism is. Yellow journalism, I think, was single-handedly masterminded and pioneered by William Hearst. And people still go to his mansion to look around and revel over his empire built out of absolute lies and deceit, taking money to curb reality through published newspapers. He built an empire around an unethical practice, and we worship his assets as a result. Now you can go up and visit, I believe, Hitler's pad up on the hill. But at least when you're there, you know he's Hitler. But Hearst was known for doing this, and even got the term yellow journalism attached to him. So news organizations and the powers that be said, wow, this is extremely effective, but let's do something different this next iteration. Let's not allow people to know that we do it. Let's be very careful about it. Now, many of you know of the analogy of the Trojan horse, but in case you don't, let's refresh you really quick, because it's a pretty good little metaphor to repeat if you happen to be in a conversation and something of the same species is going on. You're in a business conversation. There's an old tale, and it's in was it Monty Python, Quest for the Holy Grail, where they built a large wooden rabbit. But it was a empire that was fighting another empire, and they were at war, and they realized they weren't going to get the walls knocked down of the fortress around the castle, around the community, and so they said, look, let's do this. Let's build a large Trojan statue and give it to them as a tribute of peace. We can see that we lost the war. It was a giant statue structure on wheels, and they supposedly rolled it into the castle. It was accepted. Everybody was joyous. They waited till nighttime, and inside this giant statue were all of the enemy's soldiers. Their best and brightest. Their most lethal. They sneak out in the middle of the night, open the gate, kill the guards, open the gate, and let the army in, and they won. It's Trojan horse. Well, if you're going to smuggle in something that shouldn't be somewhere, I'm going to tell you that the Trojan horse technique is the technique. So let's say you have, I'm going to tell you right now, CNN has fake news. Faked news, right? When we had the big Baghdad invasion, CNN got on top of, I believe, their Atlanta, Georgia headquarters and faked that they were in Baghdad and were literally putting palm trees on the roof, pretending that they were there. Someone leaked out the original reel without the cuts, and you see these guys taking breaks and talking about the lie of the whole thing. So that's CNN. So if you follow CNN, they have absolutely legitimized the fact that they took profit in telling the people lies. Now, it's a private organization. You can either watch it or not watch it. But if you want to create an organization that is going to play ball with those who like to manipulate everyone, it's going to go like this every single time. You report a bunch of ancillary truths that don't really matter. You know, what Alec Baldwin ate for breakfast. The fact that two celebrities are going to get divorced, or a house burned down last night, or there was a shooting, or whatever. And you're going to build up this rapport with a body of people to build a tribe. And, you know, you carry more legit stuff than anything else because you need people to be able to hear what you say and then go in the real world and have it work out as being true, right? But the problem is there's a Trojan horse inside them, almost a permanent residence, which is sort of a pay-to-play mechanism. I've said it before. When I was in the video game business and a lot of startups in Silicon Valley, we used to buy the articles on the front page of CNN and Fox. They're about $200,000 a pop. But you could buy a spot. You know, once you scroll down, you have the headline article and then maybe like 3 little articles, and then you start seeing that array of images. You could buy the array of images for a couple $100,000. And what they would do is they would assign someone to either write an article about you or interview you, and you could pretend that you had gained such an amazing accomplishment with the scientific community, software community, business community, that CNN noticed you and paid attention to you, which legitimized the fact that you must be really shaking it up. In the end, you bought it. Now, in that particular case, it's really just buying an opinion piece. I mean, technically speaking, it's not against the law or anything, or it's not violating ethics. It's just, well, it's associated with the stuff that's above it, which is supposed to be news. What happened, why it happened, how it happened. So that society as a whole can make a decision as to how to run the world, right? So how many free passes does CNN get? Was it Brian Williams said that he was in a pack of helicopters flying into the war zone in the Middle East, and he said that his particular helicopter was shot by AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades. Something that Hillary Clinton repeated, right, for herself. False heroics. And then, of course, he didn't come out and said that he lied. He said that he misremembered it. Give me a fucking break. If I even pulled anyone in the backyard and pointed a rocket-propelled grenade at your face, you wouldn't forget a goddamn thing. So when you tell a lie about that sort of thing, you're trying to pretend to be the hero you wish you were. And the thing is the guy said it, Brian Williams said it on David Letterman without a single indicator of lying. All those, you look weird ways, or you feel insecure, or you touch your ear, or you blink too much. No. He said that shit as if it was as legit as reality, until everyone reported in on him and said that's complete horseshit. Which means they must have thought the guy was an asshole, right? If you had sort of the backing of the soldiers, they thought you were cool, you respected them, and you tell a little embellishment, I'm willing to bet a lot of them would let you slide. But he must have been such a dick, they just said, that fucking guy. Hillary Clinton's whole event where she said she got off a plane and was under gunfire, sniper fire, and running around. How do people not give a shit about that lie? It's videotaped. The whole thing's videotaped. She sat on that tarmac for probably 30 minutes shaking hands and hugging babies. But how can news be legit and collect profits? How is that not a conflict of interest? Isn't that a conflict of interest? You have to excite the world in such a way that they're willing to watch your organization as opposed to someone else's organization. Well, we're coming there for a product, right? When I go to Disneyland, I want to ride rides, I want to eat food, I want to have an experience. That's the product. I pay for it, they give it to me, I'm out. Well, when I go to a news organization, whether it's a piece of newspaper with ink on it, it's coming off on my hands, or it's an internet website, I want that information to be as legit as possible. And there used to be techniques where you validated information. And what's really, really funny, and I want to really point you at this, is that Hollywood is always putting up fictional representations of legitimacy. Give you a couple examples. House of Cards. House of Cards is there to make you believe that the President of the United States sits in a room and makes decisions without an administration. He is the commander-in-chief, that heroic icon of complete horseshit. Now, I think it might be changing for the first time in 60 years. The amazing series Daredevil on Netflix, which is just fantastic. There's a point where the female character who aids the other two guys, she's incredible. She is cracking a story. She has a journalistic background, I believe, and she's working at a little tiny newspaper in New York, researching things, and the guy keeps saying, well, I can't say that because we can't get it, confirmed. We can't validate that source, and da-da-da. Nowadays, it looks as if all those mechanisms are rarely ever used. Like you're an old fart if you want to actually verify your sources, verify the claims, right? So how on earth are we going to figure out which news organizations are telling us the truth and which ones aren't? I say on this show a lot, truth predicts the future and everything else doesn't. But they play the fine line in the news, and the news serves the military. Trust me. They're completely combined. And what ends up happening is, I can tell you right now, one of the, I'll just tell you, CNN has been given super duper permission to use live feeds from drones from the United States military. They've been given that privilege if they want it. But guess what they got to do to keep it? Behave. They have to behave. I guarantee you, any news organization that wants to go to the White House and ask the press secretary something, they have to behave. If you want to embed reporters inside military operations so you can get the big scoop, the big death blow, the shock and awe movies, you got to behave. The days of being the rogue journalist, the rogue gumshoe who goes in and says, you can't stop me, I'm the press, I can say whatever I want to say. You see this all the time in BBC, forensic shows. It's all bullshit, people. Those days are fucking 50 years away, or 50 years ago, right? They're gone. Everyone has to behave. There's a big giant highway being built in Texas, and it's going to be driven up through the center of America and spreading all over the place. It's called the Texas Corridor. It's part of the North American Union. As I understand the story, at least half a dozen newspapers in Texas, they were all solely owned by themselves and selling newspapers to their local communities, we're reporting on this and going and taking photographs and exposing the corporations, exposing the fact that the entire construction project is being run out of a shell corporation in Australia owned by the King and Queen of Spain, and that for the next 150 years, I believe, at least 100, the King and Queen of Spain is going to collect the toll from everybody who uses that 10-lane highway. So what happens? Texas starts exposing this conspiracy to build a highway to bring in cheap goods from down south. It'll be interesting to see how the new administration handles this. So they bought up all the newspapers and fired every single journalist that ever wrote an article about it. And they did it within 11 months, as I understand it. Silencing dissent. Silencing a threat to the people to benefit a corporation, a monarchy that doesn't need any more money, doesn't need any more control. Us selling our sovereign land off to foreign bodies. So what isn't going to happen and what is going to happen? What can happen and what can happen? Let's talk about that in our tribal news episode here. But CNN is not going to go away. Fox News is not going to go away in our lifetimes. Again, without a revolution in the way that we do everything in this world. Now, they may try to get rid of anything alternate media. That's why I like this show, because it's just one opinion of one guy. I don't tell you it's news, right? But there's going to have to be some codes, some sort of news ordinances, some techniques by which news is reported and validated, legitimized and repeated. And then there's going to have to be a line in the sand, a day, that everything prior to that date is going to have to be heavily questioned by the historians as potentially a bunch of biased, private-for-profit information. And then after that point, it's going to have to be legit. So let's take some examples here, right? Now, there is something called an allegation, and there's something called a fact. There's a criminal and there's a suspect. This is where it gets a little detailed, right? Now, what if I go downtown and there were a bunch of emergency vehicles in Huntington Beach, Main Street, just all I can see is flashing red and all this other stuff. Maybe I even heard a boom or something before it all happened. But I go down there and I don't know what's taking place. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. For some reason, I need to be in the danger zone. Maybe I live down there. And so the only thing I can do is talk to someone who's standing on the curb. I said, well, what's going on here? And a person says, well, a car blew up. A bunch of people got killed. And then I got pushed away from the event. And now I'm just standing here to see what happened. Okay. Well, I've now had a story told to me by one human being. But I remember all those white girls that thought the black guy did it. And remember all of us that didn't see the moonwalking bear. Simply that eyewitness testimony is not enough. So I have to go to the next person. Ask the same question. Test out the results. Well, now, one guy says, well, I don't know. I think it was the car, but I saw this guy yelling about Sharia law, and he seemed to have a real fluffy, weird thing around his waist, and I think he might have blown himself up. I don't know if it's him or the car, and yeah, a bunch of people got hurt, and I got pushed off to the side. So now it completely changes. From one guy's perspective, the car blew up. From another perspective, it's some crazy terrorist. And then it's a terrorist organization attack. Maybe it's an individual. Maybe it's a group. See how complicated it gets really fast? And if you're trying to report it, you got to make some choices. You're going to have to potentially say to the public, well, we have done 5 interviews, and out of the 5 interviews, these are the varying stories. Story 1, story 2, story 3, right? Go all the way through it. Let the public make up its mind. That's a process, and it's very important. But that's an emergency eyewitness situation. Now, if I'm a nefarious organization and I'm trying to sway opinion, well, by God, I could put all the witnesses down there that are part of the team. They're not even telling the truth. They just say what the narrative is supposed to be. We've seen this at every false flag that's ever occurred. We even see the same people showing up at different false flags, right? So now a news organization becomes a political mechanism to sway mass opinion, to create results that may benefit a country, may benefit a corporation, may benefit an ecosystem of fiat money. So let's take an example of a corporation like Enron, who basically created a bunch of shenanigans with 401ks, got a bunch of employees to take their money out of, I guess, legitimate investment vehicles and put it into their stock. Then the CEOs and the top VPs all hit their jetpacks and their golden parachutes and they escape while everyone else goes tits up. The White House is involved because the guy who runs Enron is George W. Bush's roommate from college. Well, now it's a little bit easier to figure out what happened because these are just facts. People were told to put their money here. Then this chain of events happened. They all have dates when people cashed out their stocks, when they were fired, when they closed and changed the doors, when people went bankrupt at home. So everything's legitimized through paycheck stubs, through investment portfolio shifting, 401k registries, everything. When they close the corporation, all that stuff. But now let's go over to something more scientific, because the unthinkable is happening on a daily basis. And it gets really muddy super duper fast. So I'm going to use two examples of where things occurred where science refutes the reported story. For anyone who has taken physics in high school and you study the resistance of forces against one another, I think in the first week of physics in high school, my teacher taught us how to calculate the curvature of an I-beam of steel based on some, it being propped up on two beams going straight up, and there's a beam going across, and they put a weight on the middle, and we started calculating the bend of the piece of steel based on its structural integrity. It wasn't that we completely understood all the mathematics. It was just he was showing us why physics is cool, because it's really the science of how the world really works instead of all this theoretical algebra. When the World Trade Centers came down in 9/11, all three of them, you have these theories of floors pancaking the floors underneath, where it weighs so much above that it's going to be breaking the trusts, and of course the reinforced 50% cement, core column of the building. But supposedly a building, the first one that was hit, the second one to fall, had 100 stories of floor. Now, when you study physics for any length of time, you realize that there's a kinetic transfer of energy where one floor has to slam into the floor down below, and that kinetic transfer of energy would theoretically break all the trusts that hold that floor together, and then hits the next floor. You have less mass at the beginning, more mass at the end, right? So at one point, you only have 10 stories falling, and towards the end, you have potentially 100 stories smashing the last 10. I guarantee you there's a pause. Every single time a floor hits a floor, there's a pause. Quarter second, tenth of a second, doesn't matter. But what will not occur in physics, no matter what, is a free fall of about 6.5 to about 7 seconds tops of these buildings coming down as if they are falling. Just like you drop them out of the sky. So what we should have seen is anywhere between 20 and 30 seconds of impact. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, for like 20, 30 seconds. But we didn't see that. It was under 10 seconds. Now, that's science. That's basic high school physics. Which is why there's an organization called the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I believe it has 3,000 PhDs and 7,000 master's degrees and bachelor's degrees in the replicable sciences. All right. So you're a news organization reporting on what occurred and the theories thereof. Popular Mechanics did a big piece on this. Now you can verify what is being claimed simply by talking to a high school physics teacher. And yet all the mass media news organizations reported a complete physical impossibility as if it were true. Now they fell. They absolutely fell. But when they defy all physics, you have to go get different theories about what made them fall besides the pancake theory. Now, that's a rabbit hole that goes damn near infinitely down. So I know that a lot of you are yelling at the screen going, yeah, but there's even this and there's even that. There's even a ton more reasons why this couldn't happen. You're right. But that's the most basic one we can discuss very quickly. We have largely forgotten 9/11 and we're moving on. Can't change the past, can't bring people back to life. So all we can do is talk about what's going on now. There's a great subject that will help solidify who's telling fake stuff and who's telling truth. Who's telling lies and who's telling truth. Let's put it that way. Climate change. Climate change is a great way for you to find out who's legit and who's not legit. Now, anytime big organizations lie, they have a fleet of attorneys with them to try and make sure that the claims are as muddy as possible. You can interpret it a million different ways, which is why it used to be called global warming. Shit ain't global warming, man. So they changed it to climate change. It's a legality. It's a way to make sure that if they ever get hauled into some tribunal by the people, they can say, well, we're really just talking about hot and cold, and, we were just this and that. Mm-hmm. Now, it just is really strange is that when you talk to folks that aren't making money, they're not taking donations and grants from the climate change individuals. They're not like Al Gore, who owns part of Blood and Gore, who services the CCX Climate Change Exchange, are making money. When you talk to one of the head meteorologists at MIT, the co-founder of Greenpeace, a couple of the most celebrated NASA scientists that have patents based on climate measuring, some of the most legitimized independent scientists of climatology, essentially the first 6 employees hired by the UN under the group IPCC, who all came back and said this isn't real. And get my name off that list of Al Gore's. Science is being played with. And the game is that if I can get more quote-unquote people designated as scientists to argue the point, then you can. And we're not talking about disputing their expertise, because they should dispute the expertise, but they don't dispute their expertise. Someone has a book of a bunch of names, and they say, I've got more names in my book than you do, and we agree as a consensus that this is true, despite the facts. Your group's small. We win. Why is the group of scientists bigger on the climate change side than those who don't believe in it? Because they've invested billions and billions of dollars to build that list of names. They went to individuals and literally said, oh, okay, you're a professor hiding from society. You couldn't get a real job in the real world? Okay, well then we'll give you a bunch of money, and you agree when you take the money that we can put your name on this list. And then when questioned about climate change, you will say, it is true, it is real. And you will use whatever feeble expertise you have to lie to the people and say it's real. You will take our biased spin on everything, and you'll push it forward as truth. Now, I've said this several times on the show, so I apologize for repeating it, but since we're here and there might be some people shouting at the screen, getting pissed off at me, here's the consensus with the smaller group of people that are just interested in science and not interested in some agenda to reduce world population using carbon credits, which I'll explain in 1 second here. There is CO2 in the atmosphere that we breathe, right? I'm making it when I'm talking right now. But there is something called the greenhouse gas layer, which is actually a layer of atmosphere that is a very specific layer at a specific altitude that completely controls and contributes to the heating and cooling of this world. All other particles and all the other areas and altitudes have nothing to do with the greenhouse gas layer. So the exhale that I'm putting out right now at this microphone is not in the greenhouse gas layer, just so you know. The amount of CO2 in the greenhouse gas layer index, which are the list of chemicals up there controlling all of our heating and cooling, is 0.054%. That's how much CO2 is up there. For those of you not good at math, let's just take a dollar bill. And there's 100 units to make a dollar bill up, and they're called pennies. That's 1 penny would be 1% of a dollar bill. For you to find out how much CO2 is in the greenhouse gas layer, we're talking volcanoes, rotting oceans, cow farts, and cars, I want you to get a penny out of your pocket. Most of you have access to one of those. 1p if you're in England. I don't know what a European penny is. But I want you to cut it into 540 even slices like a pizza. And if you could accomplish that, then you're already way more talented than I am. But you will now have a sliver of a penny that is so freaking tiny that merely touching it will clump it up into a ball because it's so weak and so thin. Now that's the entire greenhouse gas layer index of CO2. 1/540th of a penny. That's everything. Now if you ask legitimate climatologists, how much CO2 could man possibly contribute to that little tiny slice of a penny? Most of them put it about 1.5%. If you double it, most of them say, well, 2.5 tops. But that would be all the factories in China, who, by the way, don't have to comply with anything climate change, and all the factories in India, who, by the way, don't have to comply with anything because they have big manufacturing contracts with European banks, right? But you take Al Gore's ridiculous assertion of how much CO2 is responsible for man, you're at 12%. 10% over any top estimate of legitimate scientists. Okay. So now of that invisible slice of a penny, take out 12%. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing, and it absolutely doesn't contribute to any demise of the planet. I was just listening to a scientist the other day talk about this, and he was saying that everyone's familiar with photosynthesis, which is what plants do to convert CO2 into oxygen. Sort of an important conversion. If you don't have CO2 in the atmosphere, you don't get oxygen. We breathe the latter, right? But he said when plants are starving and don't have enough carbon dioxide and CO2, he said, look, they go into what's called photorespiration. And that is when they try to break down an air molecule to try and get some nutrients in their system. And that ionizes the interior of a plant horribly, causing it to go into sort of a death paralysis. And he goes, that's going to be responsible for killing a lot of plants if we're not careful. And then the inverse is true, that when CO2 goes up, plants flourish. The stalks and stems and trunks of trees get super thick. The vegetation is plentiful. Rainforests grow back faster. Jungles get more lush. It's a phenomenal, beautiful thing for the world, not an evil thing. But in a nutshell, climate change is about population control, and it's very simple. If two people get married and they only have one child, then they have reduced the world population from 2 to 1. If two people get married and have 2 children, they sustain the world population. If they have 3 children, they increase the world population. That's the very basic math of it, right? If climate change gets legitimized and carbon credits become what they have already spec'd them out to do, you get married and you have enough carbon credits to have 1 child comfortably. You and your family can have 1 child. Second, you have the second kid, you run out of carbon credits and you have to start purchasing them through the CCX, which Al Gore is going to make a shit ton of money off of. Well, that means you have to be fairly successful to buy those carbon credits. And you better not live in Houston, Texas, where your utility bills are going to get potentially 3x'd in taxation for using air conditioners too much. People are going to move out of those ranges, those equatorial ranges for sure. You want to have a third kid? You're going to pay out your ass. You were going to have to completely pay for the credits to have that third kid, which means that the rich are going to be able to have infinite children, relatively speaking, and the poor, they're going to disappear. It's actually quite brilliant if you're one of them. But news organizations have been reporting on this as if it's true and, suggesting through manipulation of repeating things, right? Repeating is the number one way to brainwash you. They keep repeating that this faux science is real science. And now they're trying to create ludicrous laws punishing those who would read you the facts that I just read you. By the way, the other 99.9% of the greenhouse gas layer is water. Boy, we better get some laws on the books to outlaw water in the universe. But they call them climate change deniers, trying to make it look like we're Holocaust deniers. Hey man, if the truth is the truth, you don't need laws to enforce it, right? Even historical stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, if there is a law to police history, that history is not true. If there are laws to police the opinions and conclusions of bought-off scientists, it's not true. You don't get together and dispute science. You either can prove what you're saying through scientific method, or you can't prove what you're saying through scientific method. You could have a theory of the Big Bang and say, well, it really looks like it could have happened. But that's not something we're going to write in the history books. We shouldn't write in the history books as truth. It is your asserted wishful thinking that your mathematical algorithm comes out of thin air. The totals seem to work at the bottom, but it's based on a complete bias, right? So your homework is this. Do an inventory on yourself about how many brands you worship. Feel yourself the next time you go to any form of news, whether it be a website, a magazine, a newspaper, a book. Feel how you may or may not believe that one news organization is more legit over another. Think about for a second the fact that news organizations, if they're not supported by taxes through some like BBC government-controlled news source, which immediately makes a conflict of interest that they're going to serve the government that feeds them, how are they going to survive? There was definitely a shit ton of fake news that came out this year in 2016 to sway the opinions of either the left or the right. Most definitely. I think we'll all find out later in life if any true journalism is done, that a lot of these fake news organizations were purchased by the other sides to make the other side look bad. Unfortunately, because no one researches anything, and yet they demand that they are given the accolade of being an expert in all those voids in their knowledge, they're still repeating the fake news to this day. And yeah, right-wing people got deceived, left-wing people got deceived. Think about how we could develop a new code of ethics for how news can stay legitimate, prove itself out. Let me give you an example that might seem crazy at first, but then maybe pretty awesome once you think it through. For those of you who ever wrote in high school or college, you know that if your teacher forced you to do it correctly, you had a bibliography. A bibliography was the index of references that you used to make your paper, such that literally every sentence that you wrote in your paper was linked to a bibliography source. If you made it up yourself and it's not in the bibliography, people can deduce, okay, this isn't a sentence of opinion. If your teacher made you write it correctly, they'll say, you need to say this is your opinion. So that everybody knows this is where you put your DNA in and this is where you got it from the New York Times, blah, 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 right? Now imagine that news organizations that make any claim of any kind have to fully qualify all their sources or shut the fuck up. I mean, you can't carry propaganda forward. If someone says someone in the Pentagon said this and they're anonymous, well, you can't say it on air. You can't. And then we'll find out how much we really don't know and how much we really do know. Now, some of you might say, well, that's the way we have WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks gets a bunch of valuable emails leaked to them by 16 intelligence agencies who are on the inside watching all the pedophile, pedesta emails go back and forth. And they're concerned about kids. You know, people want me to cover the Pizzagate thing. Here's what I think about the Pizzagate thing. I do think that it's been, the narrative has been largely controlled to take a global epidemic of problems between bankers and executives and politicians who are all trafficking children and having sex with them. And they've localized it down to one pizza joint. And now it's sort of evaporated. That's what they did. And they won. They won that whole thing. They manipulated all the social media arteries to ban referencing Pizzagate. Because it's a huge issue, not a small issue. It's not just one person in the Hillary Clinton campaign. It is thousands, if not tens of thousands of these people around the world engaging in this. But I will tell you one thing that is pretty legit with the WikiLeaks emails. I guarantee you that these individuals do not email each other talking about how many hot dogs are going to be served at the party, how many, cheese slices are going to be served, how many pizza slices are going to be served, how many hamburgers are going to be served in numbers. Do you realize that in some cases these parties had 50 to 100 people, but they did, if you just read the emails with the menu of supposedly like picnic food that's going to be served to the Ivy Leaguers of the world, there wasn't enough food on the menu in the emails to feed everybody who was going to show up. It's because it ain't food. It's kids. But now what they're going to try to do is say that those reports, even though the intelligence agencies have validated WikiLeaks sources, right? They said these emails are real. They really did travel through the computers of the individuals that are noted. And some people use aliases like our president, Obama that is. They're going to say it's fake, and you're going to forget it. And it's going to get washed away with all the other really fake news. And these people are going to get another round, another 10 years, another 20 years, another 100 years of trafficking kids. And as long as we can get our 80-inch televisions and our 20-inch rims, we won't care. Does fake news exist? Of course. I think the very first step we can do at the bottom of the pyramid is to get out of the tribes that are the news organizations. And that might mean that, let me give you my example, or my particular practice of getting the news. Obviously, we know that the viewership of organizations like CNN have dropped drastically. They're sub million on a lot of days of the week. Fox, I guess, is doing pretty good. Independent organizations like InfoWars, which sells you more boner pills than any place on planet Earth, they might be legit. I think I caught Alex Jones and his, not personally, but his team that went to Half Moon Bay and supposedly found radioactive material on the beach. It seemed like that particular piece was orchestrated. But now they do say it's a war. And so their idea is to say you fight fire with fire. The whole Fukushima thing just disappeared, right? But what I do is I go in circles with very specific news because I don't want to get all into. I don't study the false flags anymore. They happen, and there's so many good warriors out there that pull that stuff apart and do all their journalism that no one needs my opinion. You just don't. As you might guess, my focus is usually on social trends. The bigger ecosystem of manipulation. Anywhere there's a glimmer of light where I believe that legitimacy is surviving and breaking through, I try to report it. For me, the individual is greatly injured in this world. The individual doesn't have the mentorship that they need to live life. Self, family, and work. We're pretty confused about how to get that done in any decent way, and we're pretty confused about how to get our destinies half the time, which is why I've created tons of episodes about exactly that. I'm very excited that people are finding my older episodes about how to get a job and, some of the more subatomic things, because Trust me, there's information in there that even if you knew everything that I said, it just affirms that you're right or that we agree, Then you're on the right track. If I said I took you to a spa and there's two pools. I said that pool over there is made up of all of the quote unquote news organizations on the internet, be it alternate news, be it official news, quote unquote. And this pool over here is a pool of your individual thoughts. And there's some people swimming in there that also are living outside of the other pool, and they're in there sharing their experiences about how to be good people, about how to reinforce the self, how to be a good friend, how to be a good family member, all that kind of stuff, how to succeed in business, how to find your destiny, how to be an artist, all that good stuff. And I say you have a choice of which pool you're going to swim in. Which one do you want to swim in? They're both very warm. They're very comforting, depending on your perspective. I would say the one that with all of us, individually contributing is going to be a lot more calming and relaxing with soothing music, and the other one is sort of shock and awe 24/7, right? Getting your adrenaline up. So yeah, maybe the other pool is actually really exacerbated. But I give you the option. You can swim in either pool. It's going to absorb into your skin because it's water, right? It's water of information. Which one do you want to swim in? I think the rhetorical answer is the one with the rest of us. Deep thoughts is in there somewhere, swimming. Hopefully that analogy will give you an idea of what you want to surround yourself with. They could get rid of all the news in the world and we'd still survive. Think about it. What if all the news did just go off the air? All of it. Not the internet switch being pulled or anything like that, but let's say all the .coms out there, alternate media.coms went out of business. What would happen? You might have to talk to another human being to find out what the fuck is going on in the world. Ooh, how horrible would that be? Your buddies coming in from European travels would start to tell you how Europe's doing. People coming in from Asia would tell you how Asia's doing, etc. around the world. People traveling domestically within your own country would tell you what the East Coast is doing, what the South is doing, what the Midwest is doing. It might actually be a much better world. We might actually talk to each other and make friends we never made before because there's a void of knowledge. But maybe, just maybe, in addition to that methodology, you would just focus on your own life for the very first time in a really long time. And the importance and the imperative of getting information about the rest of the world through these organizations would simply evaporate or subside considerably, right? I don't really have the answer. I just have observations. You're going to make up your own mind, and you should make up your own mind about what to think about these organizations and what to do about them. Some people may want to attack them. If you got the time and the energy to pull that off, be my guest. Maybe you'll affect some change. It'll be wonderful for the world. I think the solution is probably what it always usually is, and that is what we refer to as less is more. That might be what happens. The best news is today, not specifically this date, which is in December of 2016, but I think one of the coolest things that's happening around the world is the awakening, which I've talked about quite a bit. This notion of fake news is very interesting because it's another algorithm where we are all sort of hearing something that is waking us up. And for the very first time, I think we're having conversations about the legitimacy of the sources of reality. Let's face it, if you read any news at all, that becomes a part of your perceived reality. Even if you reject it, then you're absorbing the alternate source of information, which is your own life. Nothing wrong with that. Now, probably one of the only areas that we have to be careful about is the fact that there are a lot of wars going on around the world, all serving agendas that you have nothing to do with in most cases. The biggest agenda that war serves for at least the United States of America is the value of our fiat currency through the sale of a barrel of oil. That's the most connected benefit or mechanism of war for us. People think we get like 80% of our oil from Saudi Arabia, and we don't. We get about 15% from the Middle East, and we could stop getting all of it from them if we wanted to. As a slight digression for 1 second, there's a lot of pipeline conversations going on, and obviously in the Dakotas we've had a really unfortunate situation happen where people are getting injured and hurt and having to stay up. And there's some beautiful things about fighting back against this kind of stuff. But the sad thing about it is that we're in 2016. We're in the modern age where we've got silicon, going as quick, transferring electrons as fast as possible to make computers as fast as possible. But the one thing we haven't figured out that is completely crazy? How to build a pipe that doesn't leak. Doesn't that seem like a pretty easy thing to do? But they build these pipes thin. They don't, weld them together well enough to handle, I guess, the flexing of the earth or whatever. And they rupture and they explode and they leak. And you would think that we could develop a global standard for creating pipelines in a way that they're not ugly above ground objects, that we could move resources around the world. And of course, oil is a shitty way to power all of our cars, but as long as we're allowing, things like Stanmeyer's hydrogen-powered cars to go into folklore instead of fact, like, the guy marketed a conversion kit that was $1,500 for cars, where you could run on your car off tap water, where it didn't turn into hydrogen until it got into the piston of your engine, and then it was immediately burned away. There was no scary hydrogen tank in your car. He built it, he patented it, he drove cars around that did it, he converted other people's cars that did it, and then he was assassinated. So if we're not going to support heroes like that and resurrect their technology and make that legit, if we're going to let a bunch of oil companies tell us what to do with our lives, then you're going to have to use oil. Fine. Oil's not a fossil fuel. Oil always replenishes its sources because it comes out of the bowels of the earth naturally. So why can't we figure out how to move this shit from point A to point B without having grade school problems? Too bad Steve Jobs didn't have a bug up his butt to create safe pipelines. Because if that dude had ever had any interest in that whatsoever, he would have fixed the problem in probably 5 years. Sure, it'll cost a hell of a lot more to make the pipes actually thick, to actually, bury them in the ground so they don't disturb nature. Anyway, I know you feel me. I thought I'd throw out a few of those chotskis. People asking me to talk about some of those things, but there's not a real way to talk about them for an hour. So I thought I'd just sort of vignette them at the end here. If you dig the series, please subscribe. If you like this episode, please like. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. If you want to go straight to the podcast, it's hosted at mkultraradio.com. I think that's about all you need to hear. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.